totalitarianism is something really different from classical dictatorships, and it's the process of mass formation that is important there. The process of mass formation, which became increasingly strong throughout the 19th century and throughout the 20th century. Like the witch hunts you referred to, very important. These witch hunts indeed were perfect examples of mass formation, but they didn't last too long. And they were very...
Because people ran out of women.
Yes, yes. But that's something that often happens. Like the larger the population, the worse the processes of mass formation are. And for the reason you mentioned, because mass formation needs always new victims. Mass formation arises around an object of anxiety, and that object always has to be destroyed. And so if the population is too small, the mass formation will take less long than in a large population. And that was exactly the reason, according to Hannah Arendt, a Jewish German philosopher, why totalitarian states, the totalitarianism was only successful or emerged only in countries with a very large population, such as the Soviet Union.
So what? Let me get this. I don't understand Soviet history that well, but I think initially the scapegoat was the wealthy, right? It was like the wealthy bourgeoisie and that they were the ones that were destroying the country. Yeah. But ultimately, somehow Stalin then switched, because he ran out of those. There's not that many wealthy people, right? Yes. So he ran out of killing them and using them as a scapegoat. And then he switched it. He switched it to something else that gave him the reasoning to kill all of the 80 million people that he killed.
Yes, indeed. He switched it to the kulaks, the farmers actually, and then to the goldsmiths, then to the Jews, then to the one group, the one group after the other, until finally he also killed 50% of his Communist Party members, who usually didn't do anything wrong or who were not disloyal to him, not at all. But he killed them. And the strangest thing about this was that these party members actually, in a very strange way, which was also very nicely described by George Orwell in Animal Farm, for instance, but also by Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago, and Hannah Arendt also describes it. These party members who were killed, who were condemned, they all admitted that they had been disloyal, that they had been traitors, and so on, which was very strange. Like people, observers from abroad, international observers, were baffled, and they said, like, what is happening there? We can't believe our eyes. These people didn't do anything wrong, or they did not go against the rules of Stalin, and now they admit that they have done things wrong and that they deserve to die, which was extremely strange. And that's exactly what happens in a process of mass formation. Someone is grasped so much in the narrative that he accepts the most absurd consequences of the narrative, even if it costs him or her his own life. So that's one of the most strangest things.
Would you call that? I've heard the word menticide. Would you call that? What happens? The menticide is the killing of the mind. Yes, at a certain point, the totalitarian process it kills the mind. It degrades logical thinking. It degrades all of the faculties of sense making and meaning making to the point where the mind is dead. And at that point, you're so gullible to suggestion, that, and it's something that you can see in a small scale, where if you have a really belligerent interrogator in somebody, and someone with a weaker mind, after enough time, they'll admit to a crime that they didn't do. And there's many examples of this in the justice system of, a very aggressive and psychologically keen interrogator that's convinced somebody that they actually committed a murder that they didn't do. And then they'll find with DNA results they didn't do it. And they're like, why did you admit to it? And they're like, I don't know.
Indeed. That's exactly what happens. In a process of mass formation, the individual disappears and the collective becomes absolutely predominant and erases all individual characteristics. And then that it doesn't make a difference whether the people involved, the individual involved, are very intelligent or not intelligent. It doesn't make any difference. Always the same happens. Everybody becomes equally stupid in a mass, and it doesn't matter how smart or how intelligent they were before, they lose all capacity for critical thinking. They lose all individual characteristics because they are really absorbed in this process of mass formation.
So there is a, so I've heard you talk about, there is a spectrum of people who go along with the narrative and are very susceptible to this mass formation phenomenon. There's people in the middle that are kind of like, I'm not really sure. And then there's a people who are in opposition of this. And that's the initial condition for mass formation. Then it seems like once we get to totalitarianism, the degradation of people's mind starts to actually make those numbers even increase. But let's talk about the first part, which is, how this spectrum kind of plays out and whether you think that, what's happening now is kind of what you're seeing in this spectrum. And of course, we have to establish that what we're seeing now has some of the characteristics of mass formation. But let's talk about the spectrum first, and then let's talk about our current situation.
Yes, indeed. So indeed, in a process, only usually when a process of mass formation emerges in a society or in a population, only 30% of the people is really hypnotized. So that's something very important, because it seems there are much more, but it's not the case. There is only 30% of the people who are really hypnotized. And then there is an additional 40% of the people who goes along with this first group because they never go against the current, and they feel that they don't want to go against the current, that it is too difficult and too dangerous to go against the crowd. So, and then there is an additional 20 or 30% or something who is not hypnotized, and who wants to speak out, who wants to do something, and so, but it can be surprising. Like even in totalitarian states such as Germany or the Soviet Union, usually not more than about 30% of the people is really totalitarian, and that's something that is observed time and time again. I don't know if you're familiar with experiments of Solomon Asch. Solomon Asch was a psychologist who did some experiments shortly after the Second World War, in which he showed to small groups of about 8 people on the one line who was about 30 centimeters long, and then 3 other lines. And the first of these 3 lines was about 10 centimeters long. The second was 120 centimeters long, and then the third one was about 60 centimeters long. So it was clear in one glance of an eye, it was clear that the third line was the line that was equally, that had the same length as the first one. And that was what Solomon Asch asked to these small groups of participants, 8 participants. He asked, what do you think? Which lines have the same length? And the first 7, the first 7 of the participants actually were collaborators of Solomon Asch, and they were all instructed to give the wrong answer. They were all instructed to say that line 1 and that 2 lines were equally wrong, who were absolutely not equally long. So, and upon hearing that the first 7 participants all gave the wrong answer, of which a blind man could see that this was wrong, the 8th participant, in 75% of the cases, gave the same wrong answer. So it was really amazing to see. And
there was when I studied that, and it's a really powerful video as well, and maybe we'll be able to edit that into this so people can see it. The psychologist and Solomon gave 2 hypotheses. One was that in some cases, people actually convinced themselves that they were wrong, that their eyes were deceiving them, and they were just wrong, and so they actually believed that they believed what everybody else was saying was true. And then another group was just so shy about saying something different from everybody else because they were so worried that the other people would, make them an outcast. So they were just going along with it, even though they knew they were wrong. They were giving the wrong answer. So there was 2 reasons why the participants were giving the wrong answer.
Yes, indeed. So, and there were these 3 groups as well. The 3 groups, the first group who really believe or who are really hypnotized by the group, and who are really convinced that the wrong answer was the right answer, and then the second group who knew that it was the wrong answer, but who didn't dare to speak out, and then the third group who saw that, who gave the right answer, who dared to speak out. So indeed, you see these three groups time and time again, and you see them in each process of mass formation. A group that is really hypnotized, and in a totalitarian state who becomes really totalitarian, then a second group who just only goes along with the first group, and then a third group who does not want to buy into the story and who wants to speak out. So meaning that in this situation, if the people who want to speak out, the dissident voices, if in one way or another they could unify and form one group, then it's very probably the second group of about 40% of the people might switch direction and join them. And that would mean that the mass formation is over. Yes. So that's one of the solutions to the problem. If all the people who want to speak out and who want to go again, who are not hypnotized and who want to do something against the crowd or against the mainstream narrative, if they would unify and become one group, they would be powerful enough to change the direction of the middle group, which would mean that the majority of the people would go in a different direction than the people who are really hypnotized.